Hello and welcome to this course. In this course, I'm going to be teaching you how to build a full authentication system in Flask. We are going to go through how to register users, login users, logout users, as well as reset passwords using their emails. I would like to show you exactly what we are going to be building in this course. So I have the application currently running here. This is the register page. But before I do, I would actually like to show you something. In the database right now, I have only one user who has a username of admin and an email of admin. So let's try to register with those same credentials. So I'm going to put the exact same username, email, then I'm going to put the password there and the password there. But once I click register, you're going to notice what we get. You see that we get an error message saying email already in use. So we're going to build a validation system into this to ensure that usernames and emails that have been used can't be used again. It also checks to see if passwords are the same. But I will just proceed to sign up with real credentials. I'm going to enter username, email, and then the passwords. And I'm going to click register. So once I click register, I'm going to be taken to the login page with a success message saying account created successfully. And if I head back to the database, we can see that a new row has been added with the exact credentials that I just created. And you can see that the password has been hashed so that even if the database gets leaked, our user credentials are still safe. So since we have signed up now, I will just proceed to log in using those credentials. So I'm going to put in the username and I'm going to put in the password right here. So once I log in, I will be taken to the home page. So you can see this is exactly what the home page looks like. We just have the username being displayed as well as the email. And a user who is not logged in will not be able to access this home page. So for example, if I log out using that link, if I try to access the home page, you are going to notice that we get brought back to the login page and it says you need to be authenticated to access that page. So I will actually just log in to show you one more feature. And that feature is that users who are logged in can't visit the authentication pages. So for example, if I try to visit the register page, I get redirected back to the home page. If I try to visit the login page, I get redirected back to the home page because there is absolutely no need for a user who is already logged in to be able to access the authentication pages. Then lastly, I'm going to show you the reset password feature. So let's say a user wants to log in and they've forgotten their password. All they have to do is click reset password and they have to enter the email of the account whose password they have forgotten. Now, I'm just going to be testing using the account I just created because I am actually logged into the account here. So I will first of all enter an email that does not exist in the database. And once I do that, you see the error says no user with that email found. So we're able to validate that a user with that email actually exists to prevent us from sending emails to somebody who hasn't even signed up. So I'm going to put the email of the account I had just created and I'm going to hit reset password. Now, once I do this, an email is going to be sent to me, which will contain a link that I can use to reset my password. So after doing that, you see now that we have a message displayed. A password reset link has been sent to your email and is valid for 10 minutes. So the email has been sent, and even if a user didn't receive it, they can just click this resend email and they are going to receive that email again. So if I head to my email and refresh, I can see now that I have received that password reset email. And when I scroll down, you can see the content, reset your password using the link below. So I'm going to copy this link, open it in a new tab and enter. So this link is actually only valid for 10 minutes. If you look at the link, it has a UUID which is attached to it. So that UUID is only valid for 10 minutes. So if it surpasses 10 minutes, a user is going to get an error. So I will try to sign up with I'll try to reset my password with two different passwords that do not match. And if I do that, you can see it says passwords do not match. But I will just proceed to actually put in correct details. And once I hit reset password, I should be taken to the login page. As you can see, we're in the login page now and it says password change successfully, login. So I can then put in the correct details. That is, I can then sign in with the new password that I had just created. Once I do that, I am being taken to the home page. So the password reset feature works perfectly. Now remember that I said that this link is only valid for 10 minutes. Something else is that this link can only be used once. So if I come here to log out, after logging out, what I can now do is I can then paste that link here. So once I paste the link, I want you to notice what happens. It says invalid reset link. So a password reset link can only be used once, and once it is used, it actually gets deleted. So this is exactly what we're going to be building in this course. Let us begin. So what I have here is a README file which details all the steps that we are going to be taking in order to actually build this system out. So I just created it so that you can have something to reference in future, as well as in order to keep this course structured. I also wanted to point out that if you want to get this README file, which I would recommend you do, if you want to get this README file as well as all the code that will be written in this course, then you can use a link in the description of the course, which will take you to a GitHub repository where you can actually access all the files as well as the README, because we are going to be using the README in order to go through each step. The description says that this course will teach you about authentication and registration in Flask. So the first thing is that we need to actually get started. And in order to get started, we need to set the project up. Now, what I have here is a folder which I had already created, and I call this Flask Auth course. So I have the README file here, and I opened it in my code editor. So it says you need to create and enter the desired directory for project setup. So what I did was I just created a folder called Flask Auth course, and I opened it in Visual Studio Code. So the next thing that I will actually do is head to my terminal and cd to the location of that directory. All right, so now that I am in the directory, I will just clear my screen and head back to the README file. So the reason why I said you should get this README file is because we're always going to reference it through this course. Now, the next step is that we need to create a virtual environment using pipenv or other means. So we just need to create a virtual environment so that we can properly manage our projects as well as all of the dependencies or libraries that we are going to be using inside the project. So if you have your own special way of creating a virtual environment, by all means, please go ahead. Some people use virtual env, but for me, I like using this library called pipenv. So if you would like to follow my step and follow with me, what I will just do is I will create a virtual environment inside my desired directory. That is the one I have open here. So I will just copy this command to first of all install pipenv, which is the library we use to create virtual environments. So I'm going to paste that in there. But I already have it installed, so it will most likely tell me requirements already satisfied. So as you can see, it's telling me requirements already satisfied. So I can definitely move on. The next step says that we need to create and activate the virtual environment. So in order to create and activate the virtual environment using pipenv, you just copy this command. It's pipenv space shell to create and immediately activate the virtual environment. So I will head back to my terminal and paste it. So what this command is going to do again is it will create a virtual environment and automatically activate it. So you don't actually have to manually activate it yourself. And more about this library is that if you want to exit out of it, make sure you just type exit, and that will automatically break out of the virtual environment. And if you want to reactivate it, all you have to do is navigate to the terminal, navigate in terminal to the virtual environment location. That is, go to the folder where you created a virtual environment. For me, for example, it's called Flask Auth course, and all you have to do is run pipenv shell again, and it will just reactivate that virtual environment. And so my virtual environment has successfully been created and it has been activated for me. Now, moving on, the next step is we need to install Flask and SQL Alchemy. So obviously, because we're working with Flask, we are going to install it. And the reason why we're installing Flask SQL Alchemy is because we are going to be using SQL Alchemy as our ORM or Object Relational Mapper, because it helps us a lot. It simplifies everything we're going to do in terms of creating database tables and querying data using objects. So you're going to see how it will work if you haven't used SQL Alchemy before. So after installing Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy, the next thing that we need to do is we're going to move to environment variables and Flask configuration. So under here, the first thing that we need to do is set Flask environment variables. In Windows, which I am using, I'm going to run this command. But if you're on a Mac or Linux, run this command. So the reason why we actually need to do this is because we need to tell Flask CLI that our app.py file contains our Flask application. Now we haven't actually created this app.py file yet, but we are going to create it. So this enables us basically run Flask commands without having to explicitly specify the app or the file which we are referring to. That is the file which contains our Flask application. So that is why we need to run this. That is why we need to set this as environment variables. So I'm just going to copy this and head to my terminal, and I'm going to paste that. So you can see it says specified value was saved successfully. So if you're on a Windows, run this. If you're on a Mac, run this. Mac or Linux. Now the next step is that we need to install Python decouple. Now what this library helps us to do is that it helps us to set up environment variables. Now in this Flask application, we are going to be working with some secret details, like for example, your secret key. And when we are going to be sending emails, we are going to be using actual real Gmail credentials. So what we need to do is we need to set up environment variables to ensure that our secret keys and details don't get leaked. And I like to use this library called Python decouple. So what we're going to do first of all is just copy this, head to the terminal and paste it. Now, if you have your own special way of setting up environment variables, by all means do that. But if you want to follow my way, just install this library called Python decouple. Now, once you've done that, the next thing we need to do is create a .env file. So I'm just going to go to my file explorer where I have all my files, and we can see pip file was created because of pipenv when we were creating a virtual environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a .env file, and this is just going to store all our environment variables. Now the next step is that we need to copy this and paste it inside our .env file, and I will explain what each means. Now basically, this Flask app basically means the exact same thing, where we are telling Flask CLI where our application folder is, sorry, where our application file is, and it's going to be called app.py. We haven't created it yet, but we're going to create it. Now, the secret key can be something that you want to use, any secret key you want to use. Obviously, it has to be strong, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to use this very basic secret key called super secret key, where you can set this to whatever you want. So we're going to be using this secret key in our Flask application. Then the next thing is our database URL. So because we're going to be working with a local database, SQLite database in the project, we're just going to set the database URL to SQLite and /auth.db. So this is going to be our database name, auth.db, because we're working on an authentication project. Now, the next thing is we need to create a config file and load the environment variables. So first of all, go to your file explorer and create a file called config.py. Now, it is inside this file where we're going to be setting up all the configurations that are needed for our Flask application. And you're going to see exactly how that will work, but let's proceed. So after creating a config.py file, just copy everything that you see here, or you can pause and type it and paste it. So what do we have here? We have from decouple import config. So from the library that we had imported, which was Python decouple to help us set up environment variables, we just imported it. Then the next thing is we created a class called config, and we are setting as class variables our environment variables. That is the keys that we had stored inside our environment variable files. We are storing them inside this class called config. Then we are then going to use this class called config to actually set up our application in the app.py file. But let's proceed. You are going to see how that is going to work. But for now, we're just importing the secret key using the config, and we're trying to get the secret key from the env file as well as the database URL from here. So I'm just going to save that and move on. The next step now is we need to create the application. So we need to create the actual app.py file, which is going to hold our Flask application. So I'm going to come here and create it called app.py. So it is inside this file where we're going to be writing all our views that is going to basically help us create requests with the front-end client. So the next thing is we need to initialize the Flask app. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to explain exactly what is happening. Head to the app.py file and paste it. So in the app.py file, the first thing we have is from Flask, import Flask, because we need the class to initialize our Flask application. Then from this config file, which we had created, we said from config, import the config class, which we had created. Now, the next thing is we are initializing the Flask application here. We're creating it by saying app is equals to Flask of Donda name. Then the next thing is we're now setting the configurations, right? We're saying app.config does from objects. And what's that object? Config. So basically, we're able to access the secret key as well as the database URL from the config class by saying app.config.from objects, so that we don't have to manually declare all the configurations right here in the app.py. I just think it is cleaner and neater to define it in a config class, and then we can just use that by calling the from object method and passing the config class. So it's easier and better to manage that way. So every single configuration we're going to be adding, we're going to add this to the config class. So just save the file. The next thing that we have is this if name equals main app.run. So what that basically means is that we only want to start the Flask development server if this file called app.py is run directly. That is the only time we want to start the Flask development server. So when we say app.run, debug equals true, we want to run the application in debug mode so that we can see the errors that could potentially get generated. That is why we're running it in debug. But in production, you would usually want to turn this to false. So just save that. And in between that is where we're going to be writing all our views and logic basically. So if I head to the README file, the next step is we need to create our first view. So I will just copy this. And after copying it, I'm just going to paste it here. So we have a very simple view called home as the base route, which basically returns hello world in paragraph tags. So it's just return this hello world to the screen. So I'm just going to save that. Then in order to run the application, we can just use Flask run. Now we are actually going to get an error, but I will explain why we're getting the error. Also, I wanted to point out that the reason why we can use Flask run without specifying the location of the app or without specifying the app file is because we had already set the Flask app environment variable to app.py. So we don't have to explicitly tell Flask what app we're trying to run. So if I head back to the terminal, you can see that could not import modules is the error that we're getting. So what we need to do is we just need to basically work on creating our models. But if you want to run your Flask application, this is the way to, this is one way to run it. Or another way to run it is just run python app.py, but make sure you are inside the directory where the app.py file is. Now the next step is we need to create our models. So head to the file explorer and create a models.py file. So models.py. So in here, we're going to be creating the database tables which are required for this project. So if I head back to the README file, it says we need to make the following required imports. So I'm just going to copy it, paste it, and explain. So from Flask SQL Alchemy, we're basically just importing SQL Alchemy, which is the ORM class that we're going to be using to create we're going to be using it to create our database tables as well as query the data from database. This is why we installed SQL Alchemy. And the next thing we're importing is from date time. We're just importing date time, time delta, and time zone. You are going to see why we need this soon. And then we're also importing UUID. As usual, you're also going to see why we need this. But the reason why we need these two libraries basically is because we are going to be creating a class for password reset IDs. So when a user wants to reset their password, they need a unique ID in order to reset their password. And each of those passwords have a time duration of 10 minutes. So we use UUID to generate the unique ID, and we use datetime to assign a timestamp to each ID to make sure it doesn't as to make sure that it can't be used after a certain amount of time. Then the next thing is we need to initialize SQL Alchemy. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. So db is equals to the SQL Alchemy class to initialize it in our models.py file. And if next thing is we're going to create the user models. So I'm just going to explain what this is as usual. So what we have here, first of all, is the user class. So the user class inherits or takes in db.model. Here we had already assigned db equals SQL Alchemy. So when we say db.model, we're getting that from SQL Alchemy. So these are all the fields. The first field is obviously the ID. It has to be unique and it has to be the primary key. So the ID helps to identify every single user and it is an integer. Then the next thing is the username. It's a string field of maximum length 100 characters and it is unique, as well as nullable can't be false, meaning nullable is false, meaning that a value must be provided. The same for email, the same for password. Now, if you look at something, we have another field here called password reset IDs. And this is a relationship to another table which we are going to create called password reset ID. And it has a backref of user, and the cascade is all and delete often. So what that means is that if a user object is deleted, every single password reset ID that was tied to that user object also gets deleted. So let's just create the password reset model, the password reset ID model, and you can see exactly how everything ties together. I'm going to paste this here. And if you look at it, we have the model called password reset ID, and the user class is tied using a relationship, is connected to the password reset ID using a relationship, and the backref is user. So we can basically access a user from the password reset ID by saying password reset ID dot user. So that is what this relationship helps us to do. It also helps us to automatically delete all password reset IDs if a user is being deleted. So it will delete all the reset IDs connected to that user if the user is being deleted. So if we scroll down, we see that the password reset ID obviously has an ID to serve as a unique identifier for any specific object or entry in database. Then we have the reset ID itself. So the reset ID itself is a string and it can't be empty. And the default is a lambda function. Now in the lambda function, we are passing in uuid.uuid4. So uuid4 is actually going to help us generate a random uuid. So we are sure that it is definitely going to be unique and it will never be repeated. So the reason why we're passing in lambda here is because the default takes in a function. So we need to pass in a function. We could have just declared this as another function here, but we and as another function at the top. But I just think it's more straightforward by writing an inline function using lambda. And we're just turning it into a string. We're going to get the unique ID generated from UUID and turn it into a string. Now, the next thing is created at. So we need to store or log the time that each password reset ID was created. This is why we imported date time. Now, if you look at it, the you have db.column and then we're passing in db.datetime because this is a datetime field and time zone is equals to true. So the default is going to be a lambda function, and the lambda function basically is datetime.now passing in time zone.utc. So what that basically means is that the moment a new password reset ID is created, the created at field is automatically going to be assigned the current day and time that that object was created. So we don't have to always manually create, we don't have to always manually assign it. The default value, which is going to be the lambda function, will just always help us determine the current date and time and assign it to this field. As usual, it can't be empty. Then we have this method called is expired. So this basically helps us check if this password reset ID has expired. So we have expired at is going to be the time was created plus 10 minutes because the code can only be valid for, or the reset ID can only be valid for 10 minutes. So you can choose to change this to whatever value you want. You can set it to 20, but I'm just going to leave it at 10. Then we're going to return date time dot now of timezone.utc greater than expires at. So we just want to see if the current time, if the current date and time is greater than the expiration time, which is what we had done here. So it's just basically help us determine if it has expired. So that is all we are going to do inside our models.py file. If I head back to the README, now the next thing that we need to do is we need to set up database migration. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to install Flask Migrate. So Flask Migrate is actually going to help us manage all our database migrations and changes. And we're going to be using Alembic also with this. So Alembic is provided by SQL Alchemy. So that basically helps us track. If you're familiar with Django, you know how migrations are made and how changes to your models are tracked. We're going to do the exact same thing and we're going to be managing all our migrations and changes to our database tables using Flask Migrate. So what I want you to do is just copy this command, head to the terminal, and paste it right here. So pip install flask-migrate. It's just help us install it. So after installation is done, there's something that I want to call your attention to. Remember that at the beginning of the tutorial, I taught you how to set your environment variables, that is setting Flask app to auth.py. If I head to my terminal now and run this command to actually see what Flask app is storing, if I run this and press enter, you can see that it is storing modules. So the problem is that when you have your virtual environment activated and you set an environment variable like we did here, what actually happens is that your virtual environment is still your virtual environment hasn't been updated, and all the environment variables are still pointing to the old values. So what we are going to do is we are going to exit out of this virtual environment. Now once we exit out of it, we are going to reactivate it by running pip env is shell again. So we're just going to reactivate it. We're going to run this command again to see if it has updated. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it. So once I run it, you can now see that it is saying app.py, which is the correct value. But if for some reason you are still seeing models.py or something totally different from app.py, what I need you to do is close your terminal, reopen it, reactivate your virtual environment, and see if Flask app is pointing to the correct name, which is app.py. So after doing that, we're just going to scroll down. So we have successfully installed Flask Migrate. So the next thing that we need to do is make required import and initialize DB in app. So I am just going to copy these imports. These are the imports that we need to make, and I will explain why we are doing so, and paste these here. So the first thing we're importing is migrate from Flask Migrate, which is what we had just imported, which is what we had just installed, I mean. Then the next thing we're importing is DB, user, and password reset ID. We're importing all of those from our models.py file. Then the next step is we need to initialize the DB in our application. So if you scroll down, you'll notice that there is a line here that says db.init and we're passing in app. I'm just going to copy that, go to the app.py file and paste it. So what this basically means right here is that we are trying to attach SQL Alchemy to our application, to our Flask application instance. If we head to the models.py file, we see that db is equals to the initialization of SQL Alchemy. So when we actually initialize this, we just created an SQL Alchemy instance without knowing about any Flask application yet. So we just created it, but we need to attach it to a Flask application. So when we do db.init and we pass in app, we're basically attaching SQL Alchemy to our Flask application, which is right here. So the next thing that we need to do if we scroll down is we need to initialize Flask Migrate in our application. Now we had installed it and we had imported it into our app.py file. Now the next step is that we need to initialize Flask Migrate. So the first thing that I want you to do is copy this line. Now, once you copy that line, I want you to head to your app.py file and I want you to paste it right here. So once you paste it, what this basically means is that we have initialized migrate inside our application. Here you can see that it is taking in app, and then the next thing it's taking in is the SQL Alchemy instance, which is DB, if you remember. So once you do that, just save your file and we're going to move to the next step. Now, the next step is we need to initialize the migrations. Now, remember that I explained that Flask Migrate is going to help us manage migrations and basically help us manage migrations in terms of our database tables with our class here. So what we need to do is run this command flask db init. So right here, you can see that there's currently no database and nothing. But the moment we run flask db init, it is going to initialize and create a new database for us. So what I want you to do is head to your terminal, clear the screen, and paste this flask space db space init. So once you paste that and run it, let's see what we get. You can see that this is what we get. So it's created this bunch, it's created these directories, And if I head back to my code editor, now I can see that I have a folder called migrations and I have another folder called instance. So basically, this migrations folder is going to help us track all the changes which are going to be made our to our model classes. So user as well as password, as well as password reset ID. So all those changes are going to be tracked inside the migrations folder. Now, the next step is we now need to create the actual migrations. So I'm just going to copy this and it's going to create migrations for these two classes that we have created here. I'll head back to my terminal and paste it. So Flask DB migrates. Now, after it has done that, you see it says detected added table user and detected added table password reset ID. So it was basically able to detect the classes that we have inside our models.py file. Now, the next thing is we then need to apply these migrations to the database so that these tables can be created within the database. So I'm going to copy this command and paste it. So that is what Flask DB upgrade does. It basically takes the migrations that we've made and it applies those changes to the database. So you can see Alembic is basically handling all of this for us. So if I come back here and go to instance, you can now see that we have a database called auth.db. And the reason why it's called auth.db is because if we head to the config.py file, here inside the SQL Alchemy data URI, pointing to database URL, if I open that, you see that it is pointing to auth.db. So that is the exact reason why we have a database called auth.db. And I can actually open it here because I have a SQLite database viewer extension in my Visual Studio Code. So once I open it and I click this right here, we can see that there are two tables. There's one for user and there's one for password reset ID. So that tells us that we have our tables created successfully. Now, if I head back to the README file, the next step says that we need to set up templates and static files. So I wanted to call your attention to this actually. So while we are going to be building this project, I am going to provide you with a bunch of HTML and CSS, a bunch of HTML files and a CSS file, which we are going to use to work on for the front end. I'm sure at the beginning of the video, you saw the demo of what we are going to be building. I'm going to provide you all of these files if you don't already have your own files which you are going to be using for the front end. But if you are following along with me, then you can just use all these files which I am going to provide. Now, the first step says create templates and create a template folder as well as a static folder. Now, inside that static folder, create a CSS folder. So that is what I am going to do. I'm going to come here and create a new folder, not inside instance. So inside your project folder, that is mine is Flask Auth course. I'm going to come and create a folder and call it templates. So we're going to be storing all the HTML files here. Then I will create a new one called static. And inside static, I'll create another one called CSS. So I'm going to be storing all the CSS files inside this folder. So after doing that, it says download the following HTML templates from GitHub. So there's going to be a link in description of this video that will take you to a GitHub repository where you can actually download and access all the boilerplate code. That is all these HTML files. So if you want to access it, just visit the link in the description. It's going to be tagged HTML and CSS boilerplate files, something like that. So just go to the description, look for the link and download these files. But for me, I already actually have it on my computer directly. So I'm just going to be accessing them there. So it says move these files to the template and static folders. So I am going to do that exactly now. So if I head back to my terminal or to my Visual Studio Code, I can see that all the files have been added to the project. So for you, just download it and do the exact same thing, or download them and do the exact same thing. Now, the next step is that we need to create a base.html for the templates. So it says observe that all the HTML files have the same repeating structure. We will create a base.html file to prevent repeating ourselves multiple times. So what we can actually do is, if I head to the templates, if I go to register.html, we can see that this is the structure. I am then going to open login.html again. So if we compare it side by side, let me actually put them side by side. You can see that it's basically the exact same structure. And if I come back here and open the reset password page, you can see that it's basically the exact same structure. So what we can do is, in order to prevent having to repeat the code multiple times, what we're just going to do is we're going to create a base.html file, and we're going to extend that base.html file in the other template so that we basically don't repeat ourselves. So it says create a base.html file in templates and add the following. So I'm just going to come to templates, create a new file, call it base.html. Now, after creating that file, it says we need to add the following. So I will just copy this and explain exactly what we are doing. So once I paste this in there, I want you to notice that the base structure is the exact same thing with the register.html file. If you look at it, it's the exact same HTML tags. The only difference, the only defining difference is that the content inside the center, inside this div that has a class of center is going to change depending on the HTML file. But for the most part, they are all the same thing. For example, if I open the login.html, you can see that it is the exact same thing. We have the H1 of login here and we have a login form. If I open the register, we have a H1 of register and we have the login form. So I'm just going to be extending the base.html file in all of these um, HTML files so that we don't have to repeat ourselves. So once I do that, I will just save it. Then the next step is we need to connect to the static file. Now, if you notice in the base.html file, it's still pointing to styles.css, but we want to properly set it up to point to our CSS file inside the static folder. I'm just going to change it from styles to style since the name of the file is style. So what we need to do is, it says we need to replace styles.css with this. So I'm just going to copy it and explain exactly what is happening. So I will come here and remove styles.css and I'm going to paste this in. So what do we have here? We have a href and we have URL for static. So when you are setting up static files in Flask, this is exactly how you do it. You firstly type these two curly brackets and then you paste this in. So we are going to use the URL for, and this is just going to help us construct and properly map the file path to where this static file is. So we said URL for, and we're passing in static to denote that we're trying to map this URL, that this URL mapping is for a static file rather than mapping it to a view, for example, in our app.py. So we pass in static because we're trying to map to a static file, and we pass in the file name. So it is at css/style.css. So we're trying to tell Flask that our CSS file is inside the static folder, and inside the static folder, I want you to check the CSS folder /the style.css. Now the next step is we need to return an HTML file in the home view. So remember that we had created this view right here as an example, as a test. So what I will actually do initially is to just run our Flask application and see if we can access this view. So I will head to my terminal and run flask space run. So this is just going to help us start up the local development server. Again, you can just ignore this warning. It says it's just a tip because it's telling us that there are env files present and we need to install python.env to use them. But for us, we already use python-decouple or python decouple when I was explaining at the beginning. So if I scroll to the top right here, we made use of python decouple to set up static files. So we can just ignore that warning. So now that the server is running, I will just copy this URL, go to the browser and paste it. So once I paste it, we can see hello world is returned to us. So if I zoom in, you see hello world is returned to us. So we are sure that this view is working perfectly. So the next step says that we need to replace it with an actual HTML file. So if I scroll down, it says return an HTML file in home view. So I will just copy this, and in the app.py, I will replace this entire thing with this view. So here, what do we have? We have return render templates home.html. So we need to actually import this render template from Flask. I'm going to say from Flask import render templates. And this home.html is one of the files which I prepared for you inside It's one of the files which I gave as a base template. And if I open it, it's just a very simple template that displays your name, that displays hello, a name, and it has the logout button. It has a logout link, but it doesn't actually link anywhere yet. So once I do that, I will just save this, head to my terminal to make sure it is running. I will just Control C, break out of it, and restart it. So once it restarts, I will head back to the terminal and I'm going to the browser and I'm going to refresh. So what do you see? It says hello, John, and we have the logout link that doesn't actually do anything. So we're returning one of the HTML files successfully. So the next step says that now we can extend base.html in other files. So because we had created this base, it means that we can now extend it in other HTML files like the register.html, which is what we are actually going to be doing soon. So I'll just close out this config and the models since we're not using them for now. So if I head back to the README, the next thing is we need to create the register and login boilerplate code. So I'm just going to copy this and explain exactly what is happening. I'll head to the app.py file. Let me put this here. And I'm going to paste this. So we're just basically creating the boilerplate code for the register view as well as the login view. So let's look at it. The register view has a route of register. So if you want to visit it, we have to go to the URL/register in order to visit this page. Then the methods are get and post. Get, because when we are trying to load this page to get this HTML file, that is a get request. And post, because when we are submitting the registration details, that is the username, email, and password, we are going to be making a post request from the form. That is why we have these methods get and post. Then we're basically just returning the register.html page, which is what we have here. So once I save this, head to my terminal, and I will actually break out of my terminal and use python app.py to run this so that it can always restart when there's a new change. So once I run that, if I go to my VS Code to make sure that everything is saved, I will head back to the browser and I'll go to /register. Now, once I hit this view or this route, you can see that we are getting the HTML file being rendered, but the CSS is not found. That is, we haven't been able to connect the CSS yet. As you can see, it says 404 for getting it styles.css. So what we're going to do now is, according to the README file, the next step is we need to work on the register view. So what I will do is make the required imports. So I'm going to go to the app.py file, scroll to the top, and what do we have here? It says we need to make required imports. We already imported render templates, but I'll go ahead and import request URL for redirect and flash. So I'll just come here, put a comma, and paste it here. And then after that, I'm just going to import select from SQL Alchemy. This is actually going to be one of the most useful things that we are going to use in this tutorial. Now, the next step says that in register.html, extend from base.html, give input fields a name attribute, and set the login link to point to the login view. So I will just copy this and basically explain what that means. So I'm going to copy it. If I go to the register.html file, you can see that this is everything inside. It's just some basic HTML tags, and then we have the form. But what I will do is I'm going to delete everything inside this file, and I will paste what I just copied. Now, the first thing that we're doing is we're extending from base.html. So in Flask and Ginger, what it allows us to do is it allows us to create a base file, which we can then extend from. So we don't always have to repeat the exact same block of code, which is this and this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to extend it and we're going to say block content. So what that means is that in our base.html, we've created a block of code called content. We've created a block called content. And within this content is where we can put whatever HTML file, whatever HTML content we want in a file which we extend, in a file which extends from the base. So what that means is that if I had copied this block content and put it here, for example, It would mean that whatever code I write within this block content in a file that is extending it will be displayed within the header tag. But I don't want to do that. I'll just put it here. So that is why we have block content. Now, in order to render out this form, I'm just going to put block content and end the block content. And I'm just going to basically put the form. Now, if you remember, this was everything that was inside the register before. But since the things that we are really bothered about is this H1 tag as well as the form, we're just going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to copy it and paste it here, I mean. So now in the register.html file, we're extending the base and we're only putting what is necessary. So the next step says we need to extend from base and give input fields a name attribute. Now, if I head back to the form, I want you to notice something. Each input field has been given a name attribute. So this username field has a name attribute of username. This email field has a name attribute of email, and this password has a for password, and the last one has for confirm password. Now, this name attribute acts like a unique identifier, and they basically help us grab whatever the user has entered into each field. We're able to grab whatever the user has entered in the backend using these name attributes because they serve as unique identifiers for each of these fields. You are going to see exactly how it works if you already don't understand how it works. Now, the next step says that we need to set the login link to point to the login view. So if I go to the register.html, here you can see that there is a link that says already have an account, login. So usually, or before, this was actually pointing to a hashtag. But because we have already created the boilerplate code for our login view, we can just point it to this login view. That is why we're then able to say URL for, and we just pass in the name of that view function, which is login. So when we click login, we'll be redirected to this login endpoint. So I'm just going to save that, come to app.py and save this. Then the next step is in register view, we need to check for incoming form submission and grab the form data. So what I will do is so once I clicked save, we can see now that it is automatically restarting. So if you want that, just run python app.py. So what we actually want to do is we want to make sure that we are able to see the correct register.html file. That is, we want to make sure that by extending, we are able to see the static files. That is what extending will help us do because in the base, we had already set the correct path for the CSS file. So when we refresh, we should be able to see the CSS styling kicking because we have extended from base. If I go to my terminal, make sure that it is running, I'll just go back to the screen and to the browser and refresh. And once I refresh, you can see that the styling has kicked in and everything looks okay. And this login link, you can see that if I click it, it takes me to the login page. The reason why the login page isn't styled yet is because we haven't extended from the base.html, but we're going to do that eventually. So if I head back to the README file, the next step says that in the register view, we need to check for incoming form submission and grab the form data. So I will just copy what we have here and explain exactly what is happening. So I'll go to my app.py file and inside the register view, I am just going to paste this. So the first line that we have here is this if statement, which basically checks the method of the incoming request. And we're checking to see if the incoming request has a method of post. The reason why we're doing this is because the register form has a method of post, which signifies that we're trying to send data to the backend. Now, after checking for the method, the next thing that we then want to do is grab all the incoming data by saying username is equals to request.form.get username. So what that essentially means is that we are trying to grab the data that's been imputed in each of these input fields using the name attribute. So if this was called user underscore name, that is, if the name attribute for this username field was called user underscore name, it would mean that I would have to go to my app.py and also change this to user underscore name. So this is why I said the name attributes are important because they allow us grab the data from they allow us grab the data that the user has imputed into these input forms when they submit the form. So the next thing that we're now going to do is I will just undo this to username. And the next thing we're doing is we're checking the email. We're also grabbing the password. We're grabbing the confirmed password. So basically, these four lines are going to help us grab everything that the user has entered in the HTML form. So if I head to the next step says that we need to validate the data. That is, we need to actually make sure that the data that this user has entered is correct. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check if the length of the password is actually less than 5, because we want to ensure that users register with a password that is greater than 5 characters. So we have to write an if statement which checks for that. So if indeed the length of the password is less than 5 characters, we are going to generate a new error telling them that their password must be at least 5 characters. And we're going to redirect them back to the register page. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure that a user with the email they entered doesn't already exist. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the username. We're going to check to make sure that a user with the username they have entered does not already exist. So let me just copy this and I'll give more explanation on how these things actually work. I'm going to paste this right here. And then the next thing I'll do is just properly indent everything. So I have already explained that the first line checks to make sure that the password is not, it checks to make sure that the password is greater than 5. If it is not, then it returns an error. Now, if we look at this second condition right here, we said if db.session.scalar. So this is actually coming from SQL Alchemy. And what Scalar does is that it helps us to evaluate a specific expression. And it is only going to grab the first item that is returned from that expression. So here, for example, the expression is select from user where the user's email is equals to the email that was entered. So we're basically saying we want you to search the user table and check for any user whose email matches what the user has entered in the register page. So this is the expression that is going to be evaluated. And what Scalar does is that it is going to grab the first item or the first element that gets returned from the expression. So in a lot of cases, the expression that you write might return multiple items. So what Scalar does is that it grabs the first item. So what we're just saying here is we want you to search the database to see if there's any user with that email that exists. And if there's a user with that email, we're going to flash an error and we're going to redirect the person back to the register page. Then we're doing the same thing for the username. So as we're trying to check the user table to see if any user with to see if any user's username matches what was entered by the current user in the front end trying to register. So if it is, we're going to return an error saying username already in use, and we're going to redirect them back to the register page. Now, the next step says that after validating the data, the next step says that if there are no errors, we will need to hash passwords before saving it. Now, in traditional systems, when you register your account and put in your password doesn't actually get saved as a string in the database because that would be extremely insecure. If, for example, hackers or some bad actors somehow get access to the database, it would mean that all the passwords and all the user data within the platform will be compromised. So the best practice is to hash the password first before saving it to the database. So what you are going to see in a database, even if the database gets hacked or leaked, is just a bunch of password hashes that don't make sense to the normal human being. So in order to actually hash passwords before saving, we're going to use a library called bcrypt. So bcrypt is going to help us hash passwords before saving it. So in order to install it, just copy this command, head to the terminal. I'm going to break out of the terminal and I will clear it. And I'm going to paste this pip install flask-bcrypt. So after installing it, I will just clear my screen and proceed to run my Flask application. Now, if I head back to the README file, after installing bcrypt, the next thing that we need to do is we need to initialize it in our application. So we need to actually initialize it and tie it to our application so it knows what app it's working with. I'm just going to copy this command. Okay, first of all, I'm going to import bcrypt before initializing it. So I'll go to the top of my app.py and paste this. So from flask bcrypt, import bcrypt. Now the next thing is I'm just going to initialize it. So I'm going to initialize it and tie it to the application. I'm just going to come down below migrate and initialize bcrypt. So bcrypt of app. Now, the next step that we are going to take is we need to then generate a password hash. So I'm going to copy this and explain exactly what that means, but just follow along with me. So after checking for errors, if there are no errors, that is, if no error was generated, it means that the user won't be redirected to any, it means that the user won't be redirected back to the register page. I'm just going to come here and generate the password hash. So hash password is equals to bcrypt dot generate hash dot generate password hash. So this is a method that bcrypt gives us. It is an inbuilt method, and it basically just takes in the password which we are trying to hash, and it is going to generate for us the password hash. But the thing that it is actually going to generate is going to generate it in form of a byte format. So because it's going to generate and return it to us in bytes, we are then going to need to call decode and pass in UTF-8 so that we can convert it into a string format that is suitable to be saved in our database. So this is how you can hash passwords in Bcrypt. Now, there is other things that you can do, like you can change the salts, and the salts basically determines how complex the hashing method used on your password is. So if you want to know more about it, I'll leave a link in the description to the documentation. Now the next step is we then need to create the user. So I'm going to copy this, go back to the hash.py, and here right after the hashed password, I'm just going to paste this and I will indent things properly. So what do we have here? We have the user, and it is equated to we have the user and it's equated to the user class. So we're just trying to create a new user. So if I go to the models.py file, this is our user class. We're trying to create a new user here, and we're passing in, we're saying user, and inside the parentheses, we're saying the username is equals to username, email is equals to email, and password is equals to hashed password. Now, these details, username and email, are coming from the form data. So after we successfully validated and verified that the data is correct, what we're just doing is we're trying to create a new user with those details. So we pass in the username, email, and instead of passing in just the raw password, we've hashed it and we're passing in the hash password. Then we're calling db.session.add user. And then once we call db.session.commit, it will basically get that user, and it will basically create that user and save that user to the database. And after saving the user to the database, we're just going to create a new message saying accounts created successfully, and the category is going to be success, and we're returning the user to the login view. So when they get redirected to the login view, this message is going to be displayed in the login view saying accounts created successfully. So just save that. And if I head to the README file, the next step says we now need to configure displaying flash messages. So you know that I had explained that these messages are going to be displayed in the front end, that is in the HTML file. But we need to actually write some code in the HTML file, in the base to be specific, that would grab these messages, if there are any messages, and display them right here. So I'm just going to go to the README. It says we will display the flashed messages in base.html since all files will extend it. So since all our authentication files are going to be extending from base.html, it only makes sense that we declare it here once. It only makes sense that we declare the code here once rather than having to declare it multiple times in each of these files. So we would have to declare it in forgot password, in login, in password reset, in register, as well as reset password. So that would be very, very stressful, and I don't see the need in doing that manually. So this is why extending files is important. So I'm just going to copy this line here, or copy all of this code, and I will head to the base.html. And where you see flash messages goes here, I will just paste it. Now, once I paste it, let me indent this properly to explain what is happening. I'm just going to remove this repetition. Now, what do we have here? So for Ginger, we can use this with keyword. So using the with keyword, we can create variables in Ginger. So we're going to say with messages equals get flashed messages. So what that basically means is that we are calling this method or this function called get flashed messages, and it is going to help us get all the messages that might have been generated or that might have been created from our view. So if, for example, here a message is created, when we get redirected back to the register.html file, This variable right here is going to call this get flashed messages, and it will get that message which was generated. So it basically helps us to get all the messages that have been generated. And in here, we're passing with categories equals true. So what that basically means is that as we're getting all these messages, we also want to get the category of each of those messages. Now you are going to see why we're getting the categories. It's actually important because we need a way to render out messages in different colors based on whether they are errors, success messages, or info messages. So the next thing we're now doing is we're saying if messages, that is, once we've called this function called get flash messages, it is possible that no message has been generated. So this would be false. So that's why we're checking for messages by saying if messages. So if they are indeed messages, we want to loop through all the messages that have been created. So we're saying for category, comma, message in messages. If you remember, I said when we pass in with categories equals true, we are going to get the category as long as the message for each message that has been flashed. So we're looping through by saying for category, comma, message in messages. Then for each of those messages, we're going to create the center div. So in the center, we're now going to create a new h4 element. So inside this h4 element, we are going to add a specific style depending on what the category is. So if the category of this specific message is an error message, then we're going to set the style to Firebrick. So Firebrick is a certain shade of red which we are going to use, and it's just going to denote that this is an error message. Now, if it isn't an error message, we're just going to put an else there. And we're going to set the color to Dodger blue, which is a lighter shade of blue. So after setting the style in here, after setting the color style based on the category, we're then going to display the message right here. So because we set for category, comma, message, so we're able to grab that message and display it here and then close the H4 tag. So this is basically how we're going to render out, this is basically how to render our messages in Ginger. And don't forget that we always have to close each block of code. So we have the end if here, we have the end for, and we have the end with. So once you do that, just save it. Now, once you save it, every single file that extends our base.html will have the ability of being able to render out messages because they are extending base. Now, the next step is that we need to test the code to see if users can register. So what I will do is I will just make sure that everything has been saved properly. I'll head to my terminal to make sure that it is running. So once it is running, we are just going to head to this place and refresh to test to see if we can actually register users. But before I put in correct credentials, I'm just going to type in some random items. So a random email here. I'm going to put in a password less than 5 characters. I'm just going to put that in. And once I click register, you notice that we have an error message being displayed here saying password must be at least 5 characters. The reason why it is being displayed here again is because if I head to the app.py file and scroll to the top, here you can see that we are checking if the length of the password is less than 5 characters, generate a new error message saying password must be at least 5 characters with a category of error and redirects back to the register page. So when they were redirected back to the register page, this block of code right here, all of this code ran, it's got the current messages, looped through the messages and rendered out that H4 tag with the color of Firebrick because it had an error tag or error category. So there's something I want to call your attention to. Notice that we have two password fields, one for the password and the second one for the confirm password. So we need to write extra validation to make sure that these values actually match. So the password and the confirm password. And we can do that from our register view function. So I will just come down here after checking for the length, and I'm going to write a simple if statement to check and see if these two items are not the same. So I'm going to say if password is not equals to confirm password. Then if these two items are not the same, I would just like to flash a new error and redirect them back to the register page. And this error is going to be passwords do not match. And the tag is going to, or the category is going to be error, is going to be error. So what that means is that if the passwords do not match, if they enter two different things, then this if statement is going to be true, and the error will be generated and will be redirected back to the register page. So I'll just save that and head to my terminal to make sure that my server is running. I will then go to my browser and then refresh. So once I refresh, I am going to test this out using two passwords that do not match. So I'm going to come over here, enter the email, enter the username I mean, enter the email, enter two passwords that do not match. And once I hit register, I should see an error saying passwords do not match. So now we are sure that the validation system actually works properly. So the next thing that I am going to do is I will just sign up to create an actual user. So I'm going to enter real proper credentials. I'm going to put in the username, I'll put in the email, I'm going to put in the password here, and I'm going to put the same password in confirm password. And the moment I hit register, I should be taken to the login page, and those credentials should be saved to the database. And as you can see, I have been redirected back to the login page. So we've successfully been able to create that account. And how can I actually prove that that account has been created? We can simply check the database table. So I will head to my code editor and I am going to open the database right here. So what I have right here is an extension which I have installed in Visual Studio Code, and it's just a SQLite database viewer. So after opening the user table, I can see that that user has been created right here with a username of admin and an email of admin@gmail.com. And we can also see that the password has been hashed, so it isn't stored as a plain string, which would be very unsafe. So the next step says that we need to set up Flask login. So we've successfully been able to make sure, we successfully been able to ensure that our users can register. Now we need to set up login in for each user. And we're going to be making use of a library known as Flask login. So the first step that we need to take is we need to head to the Flask login documentation. Now you can follow this link right here. For me, I already actually opened it here. So you can see that this is a link and the library is called Flask login. So let's see the description. So it says Flask login provides user session management for Flask. It handles the common tasks of logging in, logging out, and remembering the user session over extended periods of time. It will store the user's ID, lets you restrict views to logged in users, handle normally tricky remember me functionality, and so on. So basically, this library is going to help us manage functionalities like logging in, restricting certain views to only logged in users. It is even going to help is going to help us, it's going to provide us with the logging out functionality, and it is also going to handle sessions. So we don't have to handle all of that manually because that would be very stressful. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to install Flask login. So we're going to be running through the documentation here. So I'm just going to copy this, head to my terminal and break out of it. So once I break out of it, I'm just going to paste pip install Flask login so that we can install Flask login. So after installation is done, we're going to head back to the documentation, and it said configuring your application. The most important part of an application that uses Flask login is the login manager class. You should create one for your application somewhere in your code like this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this Flask login from Flask login, import login manager. So because we have installed it, we have access to login manager. So I'm just going to paste that from Flask login, import login manager. And I'm just going to copy this line and I'm going to paste it the below the Flask app initialization right here. Now it says the login manager contains the code that lets your application and Flask login work together, such as how to load the user from an ID, where to send the users when they need to be logged in, and the like. So basically, these are all the functions that the library helps us, that the login manager helps us to perform. So it says once the actual application object has been created, you can configure it for login like this. So I'm just going to copy it and I'm going to paste this line here. So login manager.init app. So we're just basically trying to tie the login manager initialization to our Flask application. That is exactly why they said once the actual application object has been created. So because we created the object here at the top, we can now come down to tie login manager to that application object. Now the next thing is we're just going to scroll down to how it works. So it says you need to provide a user loader callback. This callback is used to reload the user objects from the user ID stored in session. So anytime Flask login wants to reload the user object, it needs to have this method present. So it says it should take the str ID of a user and return the corresponding user object. For example, I'm just going to copy this, and right after the login manager initialization, I'm going to paste this. But we're going to be making a few changes. So here it says we need to replace this with this. So this is why I added this to the documentation. So I'm actually going to replace this with this because it's going to give us an error. So for the load user callback, it's just going to be db.session.get user, and that user ID, which is going to be gotten from the sessions, we're going to convert it into an integer, and then we're going to get that user object. So what's db? If you're not familiar with this SQL Alchemy ORM method, so db.session.get basically helps to get an object using the ID. So it does not use any other key. Like, for example, I can't pass in username here, or I can't pass in email here. It must be the ID of the object you are trying to retrieve. So the first thing you pass in is the actual class. That is the actual class that represents the database table. For example, in this case, it is user. Then the next thing you have to pass in is the ID of that object. So I can't pass in username or email, like I said earlier. So that is what we need to do here. Then the next thing is in your class. So it says your user class. This is how your user class should be. It says the class that you use to represent users needs to implement these properties and methods. So what they are basically telling us is that our user class, if I go to the models.py file, let me close this. Our user class, which is what we have created here, basically needs to have these models, basically needs to have these properties and models. It needs to have is authenticated, is active, is anonymous, and gets ID. But the problem with that is we would then have to manually come to define these items by ourselves. So the rule is that Flask login needs our user class to have these details: is authenticated, is active, is anonymous, and get ID. So we don't have to manually type all those values by ourselves, we can look at this. So it says to make implementing a user class easier, you can inherit from user mixin, which provides default implementations for all these properties and methods. So that would basically make our lives easier. Instead of having to implement all of these manually, we can just inherit from user mixing, which is provided by Flask login. So I can just come down and say from Flask login, I can import user mixing. And once I import user mixing, I will just come here, put a comma, and paste user mixing right there. So basically, that would ensure that we don't have to manually type all of these by ourselves. It just gets the method and those properties from the user mixing class. Now, the next thing that we need to do is I'm just going to scroll down up until customizing the login process. Now, it says by default, when a user attempts to access a login required view without being logged in, Flask login will flash a message and redirect them back to the login view. So in some applications, as you already know, you can't access some certain pages unless you are logged in. So that is what we need to do here. We need to actually tell Flask login where to redirect the users to if they are not logged in. Obviously, they'll be redirected to the login page, but we need to tell Flask login what view serves that login page. So what we need to do is copy this line right here. So it says the name of the login view can be set as login manager to login view, for example. I'm just going to copy this, head to my app.py, and right after this callback function, I will paste this here. Or actually, right after the init app, I'm going to paste this here. So by saying login manager to login view, we're basically trying to tell Flask login what view to redirect the user to if they're not logged in. But if I come here, you can see that our view is called login. So I will just remove this users.login and leave it like that. Then the next thing that we can specify is the login message. So if the user isn't logged in and they get redirected to the login page, we can actually display a message for them. So I will copy this and I will actually come down to paste it. So this value actually gets given to us by default. There is a default value here. It says, please log in to access this page. But we can just override that and put whatever value we want, like you need to be authenticated to access that page. So once I do that and save it, if a user tries to visit a page that requires authentication, then they'll be redirected to the login view with this error message being displayed. So that is all we are going to do for now. There's actually something that we need to import. Now, from Flask login, we can import login required. So login required is a decorator that is going to help us prevent users from accessing a specific view. So it's going to prevent unauthorized users or unauthenticated users rather from accessing a specific view. So if I apply this decorator right now on our home view, it would mean that only a logged in user can access this specific page. So if I make sure my server is running now, let me just clear my screen and run my server. I will run the application. I am then going to visit this home page, and I want you to notice that we are going to be redirected to a login page because we are not authenticated. So the server is running. I will head to my terminal, go to this page, go to my web browser, and if I try to visit the home page, notice that we are being redirected back to the login page. If I come here and try to visit the home page again in a different browser, and refresh and press enter, notice that we are being redirected back to the login page. So that tells us that our implementation actually works. Before I can visit the home page, I need to be authenticated. Now, the reason why you can't see the message, you need to be authenticated to access that page, is because we haven't yet extended the base.html, but that message is actually getting generated. And to show you that it is actually getting generated, if I go to sign up or if I go to the register endpoint, you'll see that that message is being displayed here. You need to be authenticated to access that page. So that tells us that the messages get generated successfully. Test. So the next thing that we actually need to do now is it says after setting the login view, try to access the homepage without authentication. So that is what we had already done. We had already set login required on this home view. So to access it, we need to be logged in rather. So the next thing that we're going to do is we need to work on the login view. So it says in login.html, extend from base.html, give input fields a name attribute, and set the register link to point to the register view. So I will just copy all of this and I'll explain exactly what is happening, but just follow along with me. I'll go to the templates, open login.html, and I'll replace everything with this code right here. So you can see that we're extending from base.html, and inside block content, we're just putting in the login form as well as this h1 tag that says login. Now, the README said that we need to extend the base.html, give input fields a name attribute, and that is what has been done here. So the input field, the username field has a name attribute of username, and password has a name attribute of password. Then the next thing is it sets the register link to point to the register view. So here, this is a link that says not a member, register or sign up. We're basically replacing this hashtag with the correct register endpoint, with the correct URL to the register endpoint. So we're passing in URL 4 and the name of the view is register. So we're just going to do that and save it. Now, once we save that, we should actually be able to head back to the register, head back to the login.html file. And once I refresh, you can now see that you can now see that the style has been displayed. So if I try to access the login page and come back here, you can see that we have an error message being displayed saying you need to be authenticated to access that page. But notice something, it is blue, Dodger blue that is being displayed, or a light shade of blue. But we want to make sure that we want to specifically set the category to be an error message. So I believe there is a place here, right here. There's a place we can set the category. Here it says to customize the message category, set login manager.login message category. So I will just copy this, head to my app.py file, and right here, I'm going to change this from info to error. So once I save it, it will mean that anytime I try to access a page and I am not logged in, I should get this error but the color should be red. So let me make sure my server is running. So if I try to access the home page again, let's see. We can see now that the color has changed to red. The color has changed to red again because we set the category of that message to error, and it says you need to be authenticated to access that page. That's exactly what is here. You need to be authenticated to access that page. And it is red because in our base.html, remember we said that if the category is an error message, or if the category is error, sets the color to firebreak. So the next thing after that is we need to make some required imports. So from Flask login, import login user. So I will just go to the top of the file, and right here, I'm just going to put a comma and put login user. So login user is a method that Flask login provides, and it allows us to log in the user and start a new session for that current user. After doing that, it now says this is supposed to be login view. So in login view, check for incoming form submission to grab the form data. So I will just copy this, go to my app.py file, and scroll down to where I have login. So in my login view, I'm just going to paste this right here. So we are essentially able to grab the username and password using the username and password name attributes. So when that form gets submitted, we grab it here. Then the next step is we need to authenticate the user details. So just copy this. I will explain exactly what is happening, but just follow along with me. So I will paste this and explain exactly what is happening. So I will indent this properly. So let's look at what is happening. So let me actually get rid of Flask dots and Flask dots because there's no need to say Flask dot redirects because we already imported redirects from Flask. So there's no point of saying Flask dot redirect. I'm just going to change this to redirect. Now, what do we have here? The first thing we are trying to do is we're trying to check if a user with this username exists. That is, once the user has provided the username and password and submitted the form, we grab the username and the password. And the first thing we do is we're trying to select from the user table where a user's username is equals to the username that that user has entered. So basically, we're just filtering the database to try and get the first item because we're using scalar, and scalar, as I explained earlier, grabs the first item from the list of objects that could potentially be returned. We're trying to grab the first item from the user table where the user name is equals to what the user has entered. So here we're saying if user, meaning that if a user was actually returned here, then we want to determine if the password is correct. So we're going to make use of bcrypt here again. Remember, using bcrypt, we can hash a password, but using bcrypt again, we can also determine if a string value matches the hashed password by using the check password hash method. So we're saying if bcrypt does check password hash, and the first thing we pass in is the user's password. Now, the user's password is the value that has already been hashed. So if I open the auth database, that's our database that we're currently using, we can see that the password has been hashed. So what that means is that we now need to compare the hashed password, that is the user's hash password, with what has currently been entered. So bcrypt is going to help us basically perform this comparison to determine if the password matches. So if the password matches, then it means obviously the password is correct. Then we're going to log in the user by calling login user. That is the method which we imported from Flask login. And we're going to call that method and pass in the user object to just log in that user successfully. Now, if you notice, we have something here called next, and we're saying request.args.get next. The reason why we're trying to check for next is because if I open um, if I open my web browser, if I try to access the login page, notice that we're redirected to if I try to access the home page, we're redirected to the login page. And if you look, there is a query parameter here, a URL query parameter called next. And this next basically is the URL that we were trying to access. So if I was trying to access the local URL /dashboard and I wasn't logged in, I would be redirected to the login page, and this next is going to point to /dashboard. So next is basically the URL that we were trying to access, but because we weren't authenticated, we were redirected back to the login page. So we want a scenario where the moment the user has entered their username and password, they are then going to get redirected to that next URL, which is the page they intended to visit originally. So we're trying to grab that next URL. We're trying to grab that next query parameter by saying request.args.get next. Now we're then going to return redirect next, that is that next URL or URL of home. So the reason why we're saying or is that this could potentially return none. That is, it could return none if there is no next value. So if the login page is just like this, then it means that there is no next query parameter in the URL. So that's why we have or. So it's either going to be this. If next doesn't exist, then we're just going to redirect the person back to home. So that's why we're saying or URL of home. And home is this view that we had created at the beginning of the course or tutorial. So in a case where bcrypt checks the passwords and determine that they do not match, we're just going to generate a new error. We're going to flash an error here saying invalid password entered, and it's going to have a category of error. And we're going to redirect the user back to the login view. So this is just going to help us tell the user that the password they entered is not valid. Now, in this case, if we couldn't find a user with that username that exists in the database, then we're basically going to return invalid username entered, meaning that no user with that username exists in the database. And it's going to have a category of error, and then we're going to redirect the user back to the login page. So once I save this, I head back to the README file. The next step is we now need to test if users can log in. So I will just make sure my server is running. So once it is running, I will just head to the browser, refresh. And once I refresh, I will try to log in now using the credentials which I had created. So let me just check the username again. So the username was admin. So I will come here, type in the username of admin. So let's just say I enter an invalid password. If I click login, you can see it tells me invalid password entered. And if I type in a username that does not exist and I click login, it's going to tell me invalid username entered. So that way we're able to tell if the username is wrong or the password is wrong. So I will just enter the correct password and click login. Now, once I click login, you can see that we've been redirected back to the login page. We've been redirected to the home page. And I can copy that URL and visit it. And you can see that we're able to visit the home page because we have successfully been logged into our application by Flask login. If I head back to the README file, the next step now is that we need to render out the authenticated user's username in home.html. So there's actually something I would like to call your attention to or show you. If I head back to Flask logins documentation, if I scroll down, there is this section. It says it's that simple. You can then access the logged in user with the current user proxy, which is available in every template. So using this item, which is the current user, we are able to access details about the currently logged in user. For example, here we have if current user dot is authenticated. So that basically helps to check if the current user is authenticated. But we are not going to be using that because in the app.py file, I had already specified that before you can access the homepage, you have to be authenticated. So there's no need for me to use this. But if you are building an application that requires, if you're building an application where, for example, you want to render out a portion if only the user is authenticated, then you can use this. But what we're really concerned about is this right here. So this current user object or this current user item, it gives us details about the currently logged in user. And the details that it gives us are basically the fields from the user class. So what that now means is that here in the home page, I can replace John with current user.name. But instead of .name, I need to make sure that I am accessing a field that actually exists. I'm just going to make use of username. So current user dot username. So this is then going to give me hello, whatever the username of the currently logged in user is. So once I save it, head back to the browser and refresh. I should see hello admin. So I'm saying hello admin because that is the name of the currently logged in user. That's the username of the currently logged in user. So what I can then also do is I can come down and say your email is, and I'll change this from username to email. So this will display the current logged in user's email. So if I head back and refresh, you can see now that I have your email is admin@gmail.com being printed to the screen. So that tells us that we're able to access the currently logged in user within the home page. The next step now is that we need to work on the logout view. So we need to enable users actually log out of our application. Now we need to import this method or this function called logout user from Flask login. So I will head to the top, and right here after login user, I'm just going to paste logout user. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we need to create the logout view. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this, then I will explain what we are doing. So I'll scroll to the bottom, and right here I am going to paste it. So the first thing we have is the route to this endpoint or to this view. We're basically setting /logout to be the route, and then the method is going to be a get request. Then we have the @login required. So what that means is that obviously if you are going to log out, it means that you were already authenticated. So before a user can actually access this view, they need to be logged in. That is why we put login required, because if you are not logged in, then there's no point of you accessing the logout endpoint. Now inside the logout view, we're simply calling this logout user method, which we had just imported from Flask login. And then after logging the user out, we're just going to redirect them to the login page just so they can log in again. So I'm just going to save that. The next step now is we need to connect the logout URL in home.html to the logout view. So what we're essentially doing is that in home.html, in this logout link, basically, we need to link it to our logout view. If I head back to the web page, this is the logout link here, but we need to make sure that when it is clicked, it actually does something. So I would like to link it to this logout view. So I'm just going to go there and I'm going to put URL for, and in here, I'm just going to pass in logout. So I am basically trying to link to this logout endpoint. So after doing that, that is basically all we need to do. So I'm going to test the logout functionality now. So I will head back to the web page. I'm going to refresh. Now, once I refresh, I am going to click the logout button. So once I log out, you can now see that we've been redirected to the login page successfully. And if I try to access the home page, you can see that we are being redirected back to the login page. And the error message is you need to be authenticated to access that page. So we have successfully been able to build out our login and register functionality. So we've gone more than halfway through this tutorial, and I wanted to make sure and I wanted to tell you that you can ask any question you have in the comment section and I will reply you. And also please subscribe to the channel, as this is the perfect way of supporting me. Then the next thing that we are going to uh, perform, or the next step that we're going to take, is we're going to create the forgot password and reset views. So we're just going to be creating we're just going to basically be creating the boilerplate code here for both forgot password and reset password views. So after copying this, just head to your app.py file, come to the bottom here and paste it. So let's look at what we have here. In the forgot password view, we are accepting a get and post request because the user in this forgot password view is going to be entering their email. So when they want to reset their password, they will need to enter their email so that they can get a password reset link in their email. So that is why we need a post request. Then we're also now we're rendering this template forgot password.html. And if you remember, that template is provided in the list of templates which I had given at the beginning of the course. And then we're setting a context item here. We're setting a value here called reset sent equals false. Now I am going to explain exactly why we are doing this, but for now, I just want you to follow along with me, and I will explain exactly why we are doing this in the future. Then in the next view, we have the reset password view. This is just reset password / the reset ID. So this is going to be the actual reset link that will be sent to the user's email. So when they click that link, they will be brought to this view so that they can reset their password. And we have a get request and a post request because Post request because on this view, the user is going to be sending two passwords, the password itself and then the confirmed password. And we're going to perform some validation to make sure that the password is at least 5 characters and to make sure that they're equal to each other. After which, we are then going to verify that the reset ID is actually valid and we're going to proceed to reset that user's password. So we just wanted to create this boilerplate code here basically. Now, if we head back to the README file, the next step is working on the forgot password view. So this is the first view which we had created of these two. So the step says in forgot password.html, extend from base.html and give input fields in the input field in name attributes and conditionally render components depending on the reset sent. Now remember that I said I would explain why we were passing in reset sent. I would like to first of all show you the structure of forgot password.html. So if I open it right now and close what I don't need, let's look at it. So we have this div and this form being rendered out first. And the documentation here or the comment here says if the password reset email has been sent, that is, if we have successfully sent an email to the user letting them know, giving them the steps to reset their password, this is what should be displayed. And the content of this div basically, by come to the side, the content of this div basically is a password reset link has been sent to your email and is valid for 10 minutes. So this is basically what we are going to display to the user if the password resets link has been sent to their email. Then we also have this form right here. Now the form has an input field which is hidden and it has an email field. It has an attribute of, it has a name attribute of email and it has a default value which is set of email. Now the reason why this is here is because when an email has been sent successfully, we are going to change reset sent over here to true. We're going to render out the template again and we're going to set reset sent to true. So when reset sent is when reset sent is true, then this form is going to be rendered out. Don't worry, we're going to write some Ginger code to conditionally render this out. That is why in the README file, part of the description says and conditionally render components based on reset sent. So when reset sent is true, only this item is going to be displayed. Now, in a case where the user doesn't receive an email, we want a way for the user to be able to request for, we want a way for users to be able to request for an email for a password reset code again. So that is why this form is actually rendered out, but this input field is hidden. The only thing that the user will see on the screen is resend email. That is if for some reason they didn't receive it. The only thing that they would see on the screen in this page will be this message as well as a resend email button, which is part of this form. And because the email has already been added by default, we're going to send this email from the backend, by the way. So because the email has been sent to the front end immediately, we are then able to grab that email and pass it in as a value to this email field. I know that might be confusing right now, but you are going to see exactly how it works. Let's just proceed, and I promise to explain it in great detail if you are still confused. Then if we look at the other portion of this form, it is basically just the form where the user enters their email to reset their password. So if you click forgot password, there's a form field where you enter your email. So it says enter your email to reset the password. So this is a form that does just that. So I'm going to just perform what the README file has said, and I will copy this. Now, once I copy it, I am just going to replace everything here with the copied code. So the first thing we're doing is obviously we're extending from base.html and we're checking if reset sent, that is, if this value which has been sent from the view is true, then it means we want to render out this a success a password resent email has been sent to your email and it is valid for 10 minutes. We want to render out this content. But if resent sent is false, and it is always going to be false by default, because when we render out this form, you can see that it is false by default. But we are going to change it eventually within the view function after sending the email to the user. So if it is false, which is default, we're just going to render out this form telling the user to enter their email to reset their password. So just save this. Now note that the input fields have a name attribute of email, so it is important to point that out. So the next thing now is it says in forgot password view, check for incoming form submission and grab the form data. So it's the exact same procedure we've done for the login and register view. We just want to grab the incoming post request from this form. That is from our forgot password form right here. And the next step is we want to verify that the email is valid. So I'm just going to copy this and explain exactly what is happening here. So once I paste it, here we have user is equals to db.session.scalar. Again, we're trying to grab the first value from whatever this condition returns. So we're saying select from the user table where the user.email is equals to the email that was entered. So we're basically trying to make sure that a user with that email actually exists within the database. So after trying to grab the user here, we now have an if condition that says if not user, that is if no user was returned from this query, then we just want to flash a message to the user, an error message saying no user with that email found, and the category is an error. Then we're going to redirect the user back to this forgot password page so that that error can be rendered out as well as displayed. So once we do that, we are going to head back to the README file. The next step now says we need to set up email settings in config.py so that we can send the password reset email. So in order to actually send emails using Flask, there's some configurations that we need to have. And for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be using my Gmail account to actually send I'm going to be using it to actually send out these emails, and I'm going to guide you on how to actually set up your Gmail account right now to send emails. So the first thing that you need to note is that you need to enable two-factor authentication on your Google account because we are going to be using something called app passwords. So an app password is basically a specific or it's a special kind of password that you generate within your Google account, and using that password you can use it to send emails. So you can't use your normal Gmail password as that wouldn't work. You need to generate a special app password. So the first thing you need to do is head to your Google account and enable two-factor authentication. So if you don't have two-factor authentication already enabled, the first thing that you need to do is head to myaccounts.google.com and then you head to the security tab. So once you're on the security tab, just make sure you go through the two-factor verification activation process. So I already have two-factor authentication. I already have two-step verification enabled. So for me, I will just proceed. But if you don't have it already enabled, just make sure you go through the process and enable it. It doesn't take a lot of time at all. But if you already have it installed or if you already have it enabled, then you can just visit this link. So myaccounts.google.com/app passwords. Or if you don't want to do that, and if you're already on your Google account, you can as well just click this two-step verification. And once you click it, you are going to be brought to this page. So what you can then do is scroll down and see this app password session. So you can click this arrow to generate a new app password. So once I come here, I will just generate a new app password. For example, I can just call it Flask. And once I call it Flask, I'm just going to click create. Now, once you click create, it is going to generate a password for you. Now, the reason why I'm showing this openly is because I will most likely just delete this after the tutorial. So I'm just generating it just to show you an example. So I'm just going to leave this for now. I'm going to leave this here and I'm actually going to come back to copy it. So if I head back to the README file, it says add the following credentials, add the email credentials to your .env. So I will actually copy this and I'll head to my environment variable file, which is right here, .env, and I'll paste these email settings. So for Gmail, the mail server is smtp.gmail.com. The port is 587. Then mail use TLS is true. Mail use SSL, make sure you set it to false. Then your mail username should be your actual Google account. I'm just going to type my Google account here. So make sure you pass in the correct Google account. Then for the password, for the mail password, make sure you copy this password which was generated, that is the app password, and replace it with this. But make sure there isn't any space. Now for your mail default sender name, you can just save this. You can just pass in whatever name you want here. So I can call it like IO, for example, or the Proton guy. So make sure this is what you have in your setting if you are making use of Google or Gmail rather. Now the next step is we need to add the mail credentials to the config.py file. So because we've added it to our environment variable file, we need to actually now configure all these credentials within our config.py file so that these credentials can be loaded into our Flask application. So I will just copy this and explain exactly what is happening. I'll copy it and open my config.py, and I will come down to paste these things here. So the first thing is the mail server. I basically just say mail server is equals to config of mail server. So I'm trying to grab the value here for mail server. So I'm doing the same thing for mail port. Now, if you notice, the mail port, I had passed in cast of int into this config method. What that basically means is that we're trying to tell the config library that the value we're trying to grab from this specific field, or the value we're trying to grab from our environment variable, is an integer. So the value for the mail port, which is what we have here, we're trying to tell config that this value is an integer. So please convert it into an integer. It's the exact same thing we're doing for mail use TLS and mail use SSL, where we're setting the cast to bool. So we're basically trying to ensure that these values get converted into the appropriate data types. This is going to be converted into a boolean, and this also will be converted into a boolean because that's their data type. And the next thing is the mail username, the mail password, which we're grabbing from the environment variable file. And then we're grabbing also the mail default sender name. Then we now also need to specify mail default sender. So this is the exact format in which we need to specify it. So it will be the name, angle brackets, your Gmail, then close the angle brackets. So that is exactly what has been done here. So the mail default sender is the mail default sender name, which is this value right here. So for in my example, it is the Proton guy, followed by the actual mail username. And the mail username is whatever email you had passed in. So it is going to be in this format. So make sure you just do the exact same thing and save your file. Now, because we already have that config object loaded into our application and initialized, we are sure that when we said app.config from object of config, we are sure that these credentials have already been saved and connected properly to our application. Now, the next step is that we need to install Flask Mail. So Flask Mail is a library that is going to help us send emails actually to our users. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this command, pip install Flask Mail. I'm going to head to my terminal. I'll break out of it. And after breaking out of it, I'm going to paste that pip install Flask Mail. And so after installation is done, I will just clear my screen and run Flask again. So after doing that, the next thing we need to do is import and initialize Flask Mail. So I will just copy this and explain what we are doing. I'm going to go to the top and paste this. So from Flask Mail, import mail and message. Then the next thing is we need to copy this line right here to initialize it. So I will just come to the bottom right after this callback method, and I'll paste this right here. So mail is equals to mail of app. So we're trying to initialize this mail class and we're attaching this to our Flask application instance right here. So after doing that, I will just save it and head back to the README file. So the next step is in app.py, delete old reset IDs and create a new one for the user. So again, I will just copy this and explain exactly what is happening. But I want you to head to app.py and scroll down to the forgot password view. So right here, I'm just going to paste this command, or paste this code rather. So the first thing that we're doing is we're saying password reset IDs.clear. Now if I head to the models, in the models, we had created a field in the user class called password reset IDs, and it is equals to a relationship, db.relationship to, it is a relationship to the password reset ID class. And if you look at it, we have a backref of user, and we also have a cascade of all and comma delete orphan. So what this relationship allows us to do is it allows us to make a query like this: user.password reset IDs.clear. And when we call .clear, what it essentially does is that it's going to go through a database and delete every single password reset ID that exists for this specific user. So that is one of the reasons why we had created this relationship. We can just access all the we can just access all the reset IDs that have been created by saying password reset IDs.clear. So user.password reset IDs.clear. So the reason why we're clearing this is because if a user is trying to reset their password and a new password reset ID is generated for them, we want to make sure that we want to make sure that all older password reset IDs get deleted for the user, so that in case in future a user might not be able to use the exact same password reset ID. So that's why we're deleting it, and it also helps to free up space in database because we don't have a lot of useless because we won't have a lot of useless reset IDs store taking up space. So we're basically deleting old codes that the user has, old reset IDs, that have been generated for the user. Then the next thing we're doing is we're creating a new one by saying new password reset ID is equals to password reset ID, and we're only assigning the user. If I go to the models and I scroll down, the first thing is the ID. So this is automatically going to be assigned for us, so we don't have to worry about it. Then the next thing that we are assigning is the user. So you might be wondering, why are we saying user is equals to user, even though we don't have a user field? The only thing we have is user ID. So why are we not saying user ID? Why are we not saying user underscore ID is equals to user.id? Now, this is perfectly valid, but I'm still going to leave it as user is equals to user. The reason why we're able to say user is equals to user is because, again, in the models, in the user class, we had added a backref in the relationship to the password reset ID. We added a relationship, right? And in that relationship, we set the backref to user. So because we are passing backref as user, that enables us pass in user is equals to user here. So when we pass in user, Flask immediately knows that we're trying to reference this field. So we're only passing in this value because the reset ID is auto-generated. If you remember, we assigned the default to be a Lambda function, which just automatically helps us generate a new unique UUID string. Then the created at also is automatically generated for us using this Lambda function, which helps to get the current date and time and assigns it to this field. So that is why we only actually need to assign the user here. Then we're calling db.session.add and then db.session.commit because we're trying to save this new password reset ID in the database. So if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask me and I'm going to reply you. The next step now says that we need to generate a password reset link. So I will just copy this and explain exactly what we're doing. I'm going to copy that and paste it. So let's observe it. Password reset link is equals to URL for, and in here, we're trying to generate the URL for this reset password view. That's why we're passing in URL for here. Now, if you notice the reset ID, if you notice the reset password view takes in a URL parameter of reset ID. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are passing in the reset ID. That is why we're saying reset ID is the new password reset ID dot reset ID. The reason why we are saying dot reset ID is because the actual reset ID gets stored here. So that is why we are passing in new password reset ID dot reset ID. Then when we say underscore external is equals to true, what this is going to help us do is it's going to help us generate the full URL. So the full URL is something that looks like this. It's going to be http forward slash, for example, since we're on localhost, it's going to be 127.0.0.1 but 5000. And then it's going to be reset dash password, then followed by some weird, obscure ID, something like this, right? So this is what this line of code is going to generate this for us. Now, if we didn't pass in external equals true, it would have only generated this for us, probably something like this for us. So the reason why we need to say underscore external is equals to true is because we want to generate a full URL, and this URL is going to be passed or sent to the user's email. That's why we had generated this. So I will just leave this right here. Let me just actually copy it and place the comments on top so you can always visualize it. Now, the next thing is we now need to actually send the email. So I will copy this, and as usual, I will explain exactly what is happening. So let me indent this properly. So what exactly is happening here? The first thing that we're doing is we're making use of the message class, which we had imported from Flask mail right here. So once we write the message class and open parentheses, the first thing that we're passing in is the subject of the email. That is the subject that the user is going to see when they open the email or receive it. And the subject is simply reset your password. Then the recipient is meant to be a list. But since it's only one user, that is the user who is currently resetting their password, we're just going to pass their password and we're just going to pass that email into it, which is just one email. Then the next thing we're going to pass in is the body of this message. Now, the body is simply a simple string that says reset your password using the link below, followed by two line breaks, and then the actual password reset link, which is what we had generated here. So the user is going to see something like reset your password using the link below. Then two lines below this, they see a link like this. So another importance of this is that even though we host our website on a domain and we have like www.mydomain.com, this entire section is going to be replaced by the actual domain which is hosting your website. So you never have to statically define it yourself. So after specifying the body, we're now going to create try and except blocks. Obviously, we're going to try to send the email, but if an error occurs, we want to catch that error. We want to catch the exception and print it. Now, inside a try block, we are going to just simply call mail.send. And if you remember, mail is what we had done here. Mail is a variable that is equal to the initialization of the mail class. That is why we can say mail.send. Now, in the context, after sending the email, remember that I had explained in the forgot password.html page, we are going to render out two separate things depending on what reset sent is. Now, let's observe. Here, after sending the email, we created a context dictionary, a dictionary called context, and we have reset sent to be true. And then the other thing that we are sending is the email that the user has, or the user's email. So we put these two values inside a dictionary, and we are trying to render out the forgot password.html page again. But as we are rendering it out, we are passing in both the reset sent and the email inside the context dictionary. So that is why we are putting star context, so we can pass the two values into the render template method. Now, once that email has been sent, once the email has been sent to the recipient, we are then going to pass this reset sent value and the email. So those values are then going to be used here. So when they are now redirected back to the forgot password page, which they will be, that is why we're rendering out the HTML page. So when this HTML page, which is forgot password, when it gets re-rendered again, this time we have that reset sent is equals to true. So what that now means is that this entire div is going to display. And within this div, we are going to have this form that basically contains the email field. So if for some reason the user didn't, if for some reason the user didn't receive the email, then we have this form which is displayed, but the input field is hidden. That is, the email field is hidden and it has already been pre-filled by the email that was sent in the response here. So all the user just has to do is simply click this resend email button and it is going to resubmit this form because the form already contains the email field which has been pre-filled by what we had sent here. So when they click resend email, it is again going to hit this endpoint again. It's going to hit this view again, and it will start the entire process. It will delete the old code that was the old reset ID that was generated. It will generate a new one, generate the reset link, and then send it again to the user. So that is what we are, that is basically the explanation of everything that is happening here. At this point, if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask and I will kindly and happily respond. So after doing this, we now need to work on the password reset view. So we are not actually going to test this out yet, But the moment we work on this password reset view, we are then going to test our password reset functionality. So what we're going to do is, it says in the reset password.html, extend from base.html and give input field in name attribute. So I'm just going to copy this. It's the exact same steps that we have been taking. So let me close these things out that I am not using. So I'm going to open the reset underscore password.html and I will replace all of it with what I had just copied from the README. So I am again basically just extending from base and putting in the HTML form with a post request, as well as the name field, as well as the attribute of password here, a name attribute of password here, and a name attribute of confirmed password here. So that is what we are doing. And also in the reset password field, we have a link that points to the login page. And it basically says, you remember your password, then login. So when they click login, they are going to get taken to the login page. So if I come down here, what we're now simply doing is, it says make sure that the reset ID is valid. So if you look at this view right here, what we can see is that it accepts the reset ID from the URL. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that that reset ID is actually valid. That is, we need to make sure that that reset ID actually belongs to an object of the password reset ID class, or we need to make sure that there is a row in the database that has that reset ID to just validate that it is real. So what we are going to do is, I'm just going to copy this and explain exactly what is happening. I'm going to copy that, come down here, and I'm going to paste it. So let's look at what is happening. Here, we said reset ID is equals to db.session.scalar. As usual, we're trying to search the database, the password reset ID table, where the password reset ID dot reset ID is equals to the one which is entered here. So this is meant to be reset ID, not reset code. So I'm just going to paste that there. Then after doing that, we have an if condition that checks if not reset ID, that is, if no value was returned here, then obviously it means that it is an invalid reset ID. So we're just going to flash an error message that says invalid reset link, and we're going to redirect them back to the forgot password page. So it's to just tell them that you have entered an invalid password reset link. So this if statement handles cases where the reset ID is invalid. But we also have another case where the reset ID might have expired. Again, if we look at the modules, remember we have this method called is expired that helps us check if a specific reset ID has expired. And it basically just does that using the created at. And the time limit is 10 minutes, although you can set it to whatever you want. So what we're simply doing here is we're just checking if it has expired. And if it has expired, we want to delete it. So we're saying db.session.delete reset ID. So we're able to do it as expired by calling the isExpired method, which we had created here. So we said if reset ID dot is expired, then we want to delete, then commit so that it will be removed from the database. Then we are then going to generate an error message saying expired reset link, and we're passing in our error as a category. So this will redirect the user back to the forgot password page, basically letting them know that the password reset ID they provided has expired. So if we head back to the next process or the next step, it now says check for incoming post request to grab the form data. So I'm basically going to copy this, head back to the app.py file, and after all of this validation, I'm going to paste this. So after we verified that the reset ID exists and it hasn't expired, we're just basically checking for the post request so that we can grab the password and the confirmed password from these fields right here in the HTML page. Then after doing that, we want to verify the passwords. First, we want to make sure that the password is at least 5 characters long, and we want to make sure that the password and confirmed password are the exact same thing. So I will just copy it and paste it here. So we're just performing some validation to make sure that the data is correct. So if password not equal to confirm password, then we'll flash an error message and redirect them back to this reset password page. Now there's one thing that we need to pass into this URL for, and we need to pass in the reset ID. If you remember, the app.route takes in a parameter called reset ID. So I will actually come down here, and right after the commas, I'm going to say reset ID is equals to reset ID. So I'm just basically trying to pass in this reset ID, um, which was returned. Now, after passing in this redirect, there's one more thing that we need to pass in. Note that this view accepts as a URL parameter the reset ID. So we also have to pass in the reset ID after calling, and we need to pass the reset ID into this URL for method. But there's something I want you to note. The parameter here is called reset ID, and we have created a variable called reset ID. So that does cause some confusion. So instead, I'm going to rename this to reset ID object to denote that this is the object we are getting from the database. So I will just replace this. I will just replace reset ID here with reset ID object so that there is no confusion between which is which. So after doing that, the next thing that I'm just going to do is I'm just going to pass in this reset ID I'm just going to pass it into this redirect so that we can properly redirect back to this reset ID page. I'm just going to do the exact same. I'm going to do just that for these two return redirects here. So we're redirecting to the reset password view, which is this, and we're passing in the reset ID so that we can properly redirect back to this view. So if I head back to the README file right now, the next thing now is we need to update the user password. So I will copy this and head back to the app.py file. So that is after we have successfully validated to see if the passwords are correct and have no issue, we are then going to reset the user password using the new password that they have entered. So what we first of all did was we first said user is equals to, we need to then rename this from reset ID to reset ID object. So the first thing we did was we said user is equals to reset ID objects.user. So what I'm basically doing is if I head to the models, I am trying to access that particular user that is tied to the password reset ID. So I can access the user by saying reset ID object, which is this variable right here. I can say dot user. Then after accessing the user, I can now say user.password. I'm trying to set the new password or update the password of the user. I'll say user.password is equals to bcrypt.generate password hash. If you remember, we can't just save this password the way it is as a string, because if it gets exposed, then that could be dangerous. So we have to generate a new hash. We need to generate a password hash for this new password. And then we need to decode this to convert it into a valid string format rather than bytes. Then after reassigning the password, we are then going to say db.session.commit. So that will essentially help us reset the user's password. Now the next step says that we need to delete the reset ID after use and redirects to the login page. So I will just copy this. Now come down and paste it here. So what exactly is happening here? If you notice, we are going to delete this specific code. So the code is, or the object is reset ID object. So this isn't meant to be code. This is meant to be reset ID object. So I'm going to say db.session.delete reset ID object and then db.session.commit. So because we have already, or because we just used this reset ID, then there's absolutely no need keeping it in the database anymore. So after using it, we are just going to, after using it and successfully resetting user's password, we're just going to delete it and remove it from the database because there is no need of keeping it. And the next thing is we're going to generate a new success message saying password changed successfully. Login. That is proceed to login. Then the category is success. Then we're redirecting the user back to the login page so that they can log in with the new password that they had just created. So I will just save that, head back to the README file, and then the next step says that we need to test we need to test the password reset feature. So now we have been writing all of this code over 200 lines. We now need to test to see if our forgot password and reset password features actually work. So the first thing I'll do is I'll head to my terminal and make sure that my server is running, which it is. And I will go to this web page. I will refresh. Let me just refresh. And the next thing that I will do is I will go to the reset password page. But if you notice, it hasn't been linked yet. So what I'm going to do is I will head to my login.html file, which is here. And where I have the reset password link, I will just put the correct link here. So it's going to be URL 4. And in here, I'm going to pass in forgot password. And once I save it, I can head back to the browser and refresh. So once I refresh, I should be able to access this reset password page. And you can see that this is what it looks like. The reason why we are seeing this email form is because, and this text saying enter your email password is because in the forgot password page, reset password is still false. So this is what gets rendered out. So what I will do now is I will actually enter one of my emails just to test this out. So I will first enter an email that does not exist on the website just to see. So if I click reset password, I should see an error exactly, and it says no user with that email found. So what I will do is I will actually go to the sign up right now and I will sign up with that email. So I'm just going to call this user John, and then the email is going to be that email which I had just used. And I'm going to enter the password, confirm password, and I'll click register. So once I register now, I am then going to go to reset password, and I will attempt to reset my password. I am going to attempt to reset that user's password by entering the email here. And I actually logged into the email in this second tab. So I should be able to see the email received. So I'm going to enter that email here, and then I'm going to click reset password. So if everything goes well, hopefully I should receive that email. So as you can see now, it says a password reset link has been sent to you to your email and is valid for 10 minutes. So the reason why the forgot password page changed is because if I head back to the view, like I had explained earlier, after sending the email, the next thing that we're doing is we're sending the reset sent, we're setting reset sent as true, and we're setting the email, we're also passing in the email. So because reset sent is true, we are now only rendering out this portion that says a password reset link has been sent to your email, and we have this resend email button. So if I actually come back here and refresh, I should see the email right here. So you can see that I have received the email, and if I click it, I should see the contents of this email. You can see that the content is reset your password using the link below, and this is the link that has been generated for us. So I can actually copy this link, create a new tab, and paste that link. And once I paste the link, I want you to notice what happens. So we are getting an error now saying can't compare native offsets. So the error is actually coming from line 38 right here. So in order to get rid of it, I will actually replace this time done now of time zone that, and I'll replace it with date time.utc now, and I am going to save it. So once I save it, I will just head back to make sure that my server has restarted. And once it has restarted, I will just head back to the page and refresh it. So once I refresh it, we should be able to see the reset password page. So everything is working perfectly now. So what that means is that I am able to actually receive emails. Now, let's say I don't even want to make use of this email. Let me head to, let's say I don't want to make use of this link. Let's say for some reason I didn't receive that email. I am going to actually click this resend email. I'm going to click this resend email button to actually generate a new link. But before I do that, let me head back to the database and show you that that link or that reset ID was actually created. So I'm going to come down to password reset ID. And once I do that, you can see that this is the one entry that has been generated, right? And this is the reset ID. This is the date and time it was created. This is the user, which is John. So if I try to click resend email now, this entry is going to be deleted. Notice that the first few characters are C13. So once I click resend email, I should get a new email telling me that I should get a new email basically with a link that will tell me how to reset my password. So once I have done that, you can see that the page has loaded again. I will head back to this page. I will head back to the database and come back. So once I refresh it, you can now see that the key or the reset ID with C13 has been deleted, and there's only one new entry that is there. The reason why it was deleted is because the moment you try to click forgot password, after it has validated that the user exists, it will first of all delete the existing reset IDs. So that is why we see a new ID being created. And for this old reset link, if I actually try to refresh here, you can see that it tells me invalid reset link because that link has been deleted from the database. So what I will do now is I will head back to my email, and I should have actually received a new email, as you can see here. So I will then come down and copy this link. So once I copy this link, I will head back to a new page and I'm going to paste that link there. So once I paste it there, I'm just going to try to reset the password by entering passwords that do not match. First of all, I'm going to click reset. So this, instead of register, this is actually meant to say reset. So let me go back here, and from register, I'm going to change this to, where is it? I'm going to change this to reset password. I'm going to save that. But you can see that it told us that passwords do not match. So I'm just going to refresh again, and I'm actually going to enter passwords that match this time. And once I click reset password, it still tells us, okay, I think I made a mistake. Let me type it correctly this time. Once I click reset password, I should be taken to the login view with a success message telling me that my password has been reset. So as you can see, I'm in the login view now and it says password changed successfully. So I am going to try and log in with those details that I had just used. So I'm going to type that as username and type this as the password. And once I click login, I should be able to log in successfully. So you can see now that the authentication system that we have built is working successfully. Users are able to create their accounts, they're able to log in, they're able to reset the passwords, and they're also able to log out. But there's actually one more thing that needs to be done before I forget. The next step, according to the README file, says that we need to restrict authenticated users from accessing auth pages. So what that means is that as an authenticated user, if you are logged in, then there is no reason for you to be able to access the login page, the register page, or even the forgot password page because you are already logged in. There's no need for you to access those pages. So what I will do is I'm going to import this current user from Flask login. So I will copy that, head to my app.py file, and then from Flask login, I will just paste that current user. So if you remember, the current user just gives us details about the currently logged in user. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is it says prevent unauthenticated users from visiting the register login and forgot password, the register login, forgot password, and reset password pages using this. So it basically says if current user dot is authenticated, that is, if the current user that is using our website is logged in, then we just need to redirect them back to the home page. So I'm going to copy this command, or copy this code rather. In the login, in the register view, at the top, I'm going to paste it right here. Let me just copy this because it's indented. And then I'll scroll down. I'll do the exact same thing for the login page. I will do the exact same thing for the forgot password page. And after that, I'll do the same for the reset password page so that if you're logged in, you wouldn't be able to access any of these authentication pages. So I'm just going to test that right now. I'm going to make sure my server is running. So once it has refreshed, I will just go ahead and log in right now. So let me log in with my first user details. So now that I'm logged in, if I try to access the login page, I want you to notice what happens. You can see that we get redirected back to the home page. If I try to visit the register page, you can see that we get redirected back to the home page. So that basically prevents an already logged in user from accessing the auth pages. So that is all we're going to talk about in this
course, guys. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section. And if you want to get all the code written in this course as well as the README file, again, I explained that you can use a link in the description below to access the materials. Please like, share, subscribe, as that is the number one way of supporting the channel. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.